this in a person's house or in another facility, we would be obligated to report these caregivers for child abuse and neglect. These children are hungry, they are sick, they're being locked up. They literally, we have as many as 300 children being locked up in a warehouse with no windows. It is insane. It's something that you never would imagine to see in our country.
What is your sense of where these children are coming from, how they're getting there? These are children with no parent around them, no adult figure around them.
Well, they certainly came with adult figures, and this is part of what is so hard for me as a children's expert, is that we know that children belong with their families, excuse me, and that almost all of these children came to the United States with family members, and they had family living in the United States. Many of them have parents living in the United States, and they need to be with their families. We were able to call up many of the parents ourselves right there in the conference room and talk to them. They would come and pick up their kids that day. If the government would simply release them to their families, they would pay for the children to be put on flights so that they can be in the safe and loving homes that these families have created for their children. And there's really no explanation as to why the government is holding these children in these warehouses, in these cells that are not intended for children at all.
And you're saying you would normally say this is a condition, a situation of neglect. Is this a function just of well-meaning personnel being overwhelmed by a situation in terms of the folks who are there, the guards, the folks who are running this facility? What is your sense of it? Are these folks who are just overwhelmed? Are these folks, are you seeing them making the situation worse at all? The folks who are there in charge of this, what was your assessment?
Well, let me just make clear that everybody understands it is not the Border Patrol's job to take care of children. We have always known that. That's why these facilities are not appropriate for children. They are as upset as we are that these children are being put into their care because they don't have the ability to care for them. They need to be out on the border doing their job, which is to apprehend people who are coming across the border, not caring for children. So they don't have the training that they need, they don't have the facilities that we need, and so the government is putting them in an untenable position by abandoning these children in Border Patrol care. These children need to be with their families. Most of the children that I spoke to have been separated from their families when they were apprehended. They have families here, and all the government needs to do is to release these children to their families. A few of these children might not have families in the United States, and for those children, the government has set up a whole system called the Office of Refugee Resettlement that has 12,000 beds. Right now we have approximately 2,000 empty beds where we could place these hundreds of children, and they can be cared for until they can be placed in a safe home with their parents or another family member or another adult who's authorized by the parents to take care of their children in the United States, which is what's required under the law of Flores.
Okay, so the president was asked about these conditions at this facility. Let's play what he had to say about it.
What we've done is we've ended separation. You know, under President Obama, you had separation. I was the one that ended it. Now, I said one thing. When I ended it, I said, here's what's going to happen. More families are going to come up.
It is heartbreaking to see what you see. Families that are in these detention centers, it's totally unacceptable. But the American people deserve to know that our dedicated Customs and Border Patrol agents are literally being overwhelmed by hundreds of thousands of people coming across our border to take advantage of loopholes in our laws.
It looks like these kids are being used as some sort of, is it hostage?
Well, they are being used by very bad people on the other side, where they actually get paid, where the money is being made using them because our laws are so bad. Because if you have a child, you have an advantage. You know that better than anybody. If the Democrats would change the asylum laws and the loopholes, which they refuse to do because they think it's good politics, everything would be solved immediately. But they refuse to do it.
So Julia Ainsley, let me bring you in here because you know you've been covering this just in terms of the policy. And maybe you can explain for folks who listen to the president there who says, I ended child separation, that policy's done. We just heard from Warren Binford, who's in the facility, talking about these children having been separated from their parents at the border. So from a policy standpoint, what is going on to bring about the kinds of conditions that Warren's describing?
Well, Steve, I'll tell you what is going on with these children, but then I do have a question for Warren if she is still there so that I fully understand what's happening with these children there. But what happens typically is that children come across the border, they stay in Customs and Border Protection. They're supposed to be there only 72 hours before they go to Health and Human Services, which Warren described very well. They're better equipped to take care of these children. Right now, because there's a lack of detention space or they're not getting to Health and Human Services quickly enough, they are staying in these facilities, jail-like conditions, far longer than they should have. And yes, the systematic separation of families ended about a year ago now with the executive order. But Trump did start zero tolerance. He started to separate children from any parent who crossed the border illegally, which is just a misdemeanor. Prior to that policy, no child was separated from their parent simply for that act alone. They might be separated if they committed a felony or if it was considered too dangerous for this child to be with the parent for whatever reason. The question I have to Warren now is, are these children that she's seeing being separated from their actual biological parents, and are those parents who have only had a misdemeanor of crossing the border illegally? Because what can also happen is they get separated from families. It could be someone like a grandparent, and they're separated because unfortunately our laws don't recognize grandparents as someone who could be a lawful guardian as a child.
Yeah, Warren, can you clarify that?
Yes, we are seeing children both separated from their parents and being separated from other family members. It's really critical for us to understand that adult sisters, brothers, aunts, grandmothers, that all of these play a role in the care of children. And especially if you have a family that's in crisis, which is what many of these families are experiencing in their home countries, and they're trying to reunite their family in a safe place, many of whom have a lawful status here, that their children need to come up here and be with them. And so it's critical that we understand that family cannot be limited to just parents and children, but needs to include these other family members as well. However, we absolutely positively did see children separated from their parents in this facility, including one little girl who was separated from both her mother, her father, and her younger sibling. It's totally unacceptable, and it's severely traumatizing these children. The Border Patrol facility. Go ahead.
Sorry, Warren, did they give a reason for that separation? Was it that this parent had done anything more than just cross the border illegally like so many other parents do?
No, the process that we conduct when we are doing these site visits is we interview the children, but we are only there for a few days. We only have an hour or two with each child, and we are not allowed to do individual advocacy afterwards. And so all we can do is take the information from the child and then report to the court what this child has experienced. What we are seeing, though, is that the children who are there are not being adequately cared for. In fact, they're being abused and neglected, and it's critical that people contact their congressperson and demand that there be adequate oversight over this, and that these children be removed from this facility and frankly all Border Patrol facilities immediately. Talking about them being overwhelmed, what we know is we are nowhere near the height in immigration that we've seen in recent decades, and so it's not really a problem with the numbers coming across the border. It's an issue of mismanagement by this administration. They are paying $775 per day to put these children in facilities when these children have family members in the United States, and under Flores they are supposed to be released to them as expeditiously as possible, and as was pointed out earlier, no more than a few hours, 72 hours maximum in a Border Patrol facility, and no more than 20 days maximum in an ORR facility. And we are interviewing children. I've been at the Walmart, I've been at the Tent City, I've been at the Dilley Family Detention Center. What we're seeing with the children who are being held there, they're being held there sometimes for over 9 months, and it's costing the taxpayers a tremendous amount of money. So when they talk about a shortage of resources, it's not really an issue of resources. It is mismanagement.
Let me make sure I'm clear on this, because I want to clear. I guess it's a source of confusion, because you say it's not a resource issue. The immigration numbers are down, but we've also been talking in the last few months about the number of migrants who are being detained at the border. An incredible increase there in the last year or so. I think there were 144,000 we're talking about who were detained in May. We were talking about some astronomical increase, year over year, over 2 years. Is that contributing? I understand what you're saying about immigration, but is the wave of migrants who've been coming to the border contributing to this?
So I'm referring to the number of apprehensions that are happening at the border. And if you measure it by the number of apprehensions at the border, we are nowhere near our maximum as a country in recent decades. Really, if these children were being moved through the system and reunited with their families according to the timelines that are set under law in the United States, including the Flores case, we would not have this crisis with regard to these children. And then on top of that, even if there were a crisis, there is no excuse to keep these children in the conditions where they're being kept.
We also should get this out there. This was a CBP official who released this statement to NBC News. It said, quote, U.S. Customs and Border Protection leverages our limited resources to provide the best care possible to those in our custody, especially children. As DHS and CBP leadership have noted numerous times, our short-term holding facilities were not designed to hold vulnerable populations, and we urgently need additional humanitarian funding to manage this crisis. They go on to say, quote, all allegations of civil rights abuses or mistreatment in CBP detention are taken seriously and investigated to the fullest extent possible. John Lemire, I want to bring you into this in terms of the president this weekend also called off this idea of a series of raids involving undocumented families for deportation. And he seemed to say it's a 2-week pause. He is saying, suggesting